this video, we are going to show you some of the highlights of a walking tour we went on in the Olde Towne Historic District of Portsmouth, Virginia. That city is adjacent to Norfolk, Virginia, which neighbors Virginia Beach. For Mother's Day, Jack's mom, who lives in the Virginia Beach area, asked us to take her on the Steeple to Steeple Tour, a walking tour of historic churches and a historic synagogue in Portsmouth. It was a great tour that is held annually on Mother's Day weekend, and we are going to tell you about some of the houses of worship we saw and share a lot of history too, including a stop on the Underground Railroad. The tour started at St. Paul's Roman Catholic Church. This was the first Catholic church in Portsmouth. The original building was built in the early 1800s by Irish and French immigrants. This is not the original building though, or the second building, or even the fourth. This is the church's fifth building. This current building was completed in 1905. It is one of the most visually stunning on the tour. It is an example of a Gothic revival with high Gothic arches and a cross-shaped floor plan. The church features 28 stained glass windows ordered from Munich, Germany, and 11 murals across the front of the altar. The pulpit is made of Italian marble. At each church on this tour, we were given a few minutes to walk around and take in the building, and then we would sit in the pews while a church historian shared with us about each building and its congregation. After the program concluded at this first church, we were split into tour groups. Each group was led by a guide who for some reason was wearing a Civil War reenactor's uniform. I'm guessing they are more used to giving historic tours and talks related to the Civil War, and they had them wear their uniforms so they would be easy to find in the group.
The group we were in then went to Chèvre. Sincere apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. It's a best guess. We thought this was going to be a tour of an active synagogue, but it turned out this building has been turned into a Jewish museum and cultural center. There are no longer any active synagogues in Portsmouth. Jewish residents must go to Norfolk or Virginia Beach for the nearest house of worship. This is an interesting building because it's one of the few remaining examples of an Eastern European Orthodox synagogue, which is in the style of many of those that got destroyed in Europe in World War II. At its height, this synagogue had about 200 families. But by the mid-1980s, the synagogue no longer had enough people to have quorum, which is because 10 Jewish men over the age of 13 must be present in order to conduct services. So the synagogue closed its doors. The museum's not currently open on a specific regular schedule. They are open though for special events, which are listed on their website, so you can see the museum and its exhibits at these events. There were a number of fascinating things to see here, but the first thing I actually noticed were that there were several places where it appeared the Vulcan salute hand sign was on display, which I thought was odd. But the speaker at this location told us how Leonard Nimoy, the actor who played Spock in Star Trek, was Jewish and remembered seeing that hand sign used in synagogue services as part of a blessing. So he integrated that gesture into the character.
Next, we visited Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. This church kind of blew our minds. It was originally founded before the American Revolution. It is the oldest African American church in the area. The building this church was originally meeting in burned to the ground as a result of arson in 1856. This building that we toured was built by slaves and free blacks in 1 year and opened in 1857. This building still has its original stained glass windows and hand-carved benches, all of which makes it a really cool place. But it was also a stop on the Underground Railroad, and it was built with that purpose in mind. slaves attempting to escape were hidden up in the attic. There was a panel at the top of the stained glass that served as a lookout, so people in the attic could look out for potential captors below. The church is a short distance away from the Elizabeth River, so runaway enslaved people would hide in the church until a boat came that could be trusted to stow them away and smuggle them up north. It was amazing to be standing somewhere that played such a big role in helping local people escape slavery. There was another compartment behind the choir where people could be hidden. Obviously, over 150 years have passed, so the space is used to house what looked to be pipe organ equipment, but it was once a hidden compartment where people could be stashed quickly. No runaway slave was ever caught at the church. The speakers who shared about this church also described what the symbols on the ceiling and around the church mean. We were told in advance that this church was part of the Underground Railroad, but we did not expect to see actual places where they hid people escaping captivity. It was a really awesome tour.
We aren't going to spend as much time on the remaining churches, not because they don't have fascinating histories, but this would be a very long video if we went into great detail about the history of all 8 of these places we visited. But here are a few highlights. Next up on the tour was Monumental Methodist Church. Founded in 1772, this church started the first Sunday school in Portsmouth in 1818. We heard about its history, including a fairly recent steeple fire in 2018. But the best part of our visit here was a short pipe organ concert by the church's music minister, where we learned how the pipe organ can mimic other instruments and sound like an orchestra all on its own.
And a flute. And a clarinet. Then we also have a few other instruments in our orchestra. Then, when you put all of those sounds together, we get to celebrate Easter.
Next, we walked to St. John's Episcopal Church. This church opened in 1850 in a different location. In 1863, during the Civil War, when the Union Army occupied the town of Portsmouth, they took control of the church building to use it as a place of worship for Union soldiers. The parishioners were then able to return to their church once the war ended. The current building was built in 1897 using rose granite from North Carolina. This church showed us a video about their history rather than have a speaker, though the rector stayed around after the video to answer any questions anyone had. Above the entry to the sanctuary is a beautiful rose window with the Lamb Triumphant in the center representing Jesus, with 8 lobes, each featuring a different Christian symbol all around it. After we had time to explore the sanctuary, lunch was served in the fellowship hall. This meal was included in the cost of the tour. As we left, we were allowed to pull the rope to ring the church bell. There was a little garden for reflection connected to the church as well, which we also checked out. Next, we walked to Court Street Baptist Church. All these churches are a short walk away from each other, usually 3 or 4 blocks, sometimes more, but sometimes they were also right across the street from each other as well. This church opened in 1789, making it the oldest Baptist church in Portsmouth. This particular building is a Romanesque revival that was built in 1903. It was interesting to see. The Baptists are the denomination that Alice and I have been most affiliated with in our lives, though we tend not to focus too much on denominations and separations and instead try to focus on what we have in common with other believers. Nonetheless, Baptist churches are typically not very ornate, and there is a reason for that. There's a feeling that art and architecture can distract from worship. People should be impressed by God, not by stained glass and statues, according to this line of thought. And of course, others believe the artistry of the sanctuary can inspire worship. But there are some Baptist churches that buck this trend of not being very ornate, and this is one of them. With stained glass and an intricate vaulted ceiling, this sanctuary definitely fits in among the other elaborate worship centers on the tour.
Next was First Presbyterian Church of Portsmouth. This congregation dates back to 1822. Their current building is their third after the first 2 buildings both burned down. Apparently, a lot of buildings burned down in the past. The pews and stenciled glass windows originally came from England and had been saved from the second church building burning. Stenciled glass, we learned, is decorated using stencils and paints as opposed to stained glass, which is made using glass of various colors. This tour included another organ concert as well. We were again allowed an opportunity to ring the church bell upon exiting. Our tour concluded with Trinity Episcopal Church, which opened in 1762. Once again, there were stories of the Civil War. For example, the pews were removed and the church became a hospital for African American soldiers wounded in the fighting when the Union occupied the town. The church also has 6 Tiffany stained glass windows dating back to 1894. Once again, we got to ring the church bell on our way out. This was a great tour. It is held Mother's Day weekend and it's limited to 100 people each year. Tickets go on sale the day after Easter and they often sell out. Tickets are $22 in advance, which does include lunch. We really enjoyed this tour. Several of the churches mentioned that they will do private tours of their historic buildings. We have listed the churches in the description field below. You can Google them to find out their contact information. Even if you aren't coming anywhere near Portsmouth, we definitely encourage you to check out historical tours, both where you live and as you travel. We have learned and seen many fascinating things along the way. If you like learning about history, check out the videos we have linked at the end of this one. I'm Alice.
And I'm Jack.
Be sure to click the subscribe button and the notification bell so we can see you the next time we're traveling through history.